Everybody, it's Strassen again. We are going to talk about more genetics today, genes, and it's going to be even more interesting because we're going to talk about why you look the way you look. We're going to start talking about why you function the way you function as far as like diseases or what you might be immune to. We're going to start getting into things about that explain why you are the way you are or why plants are the way they are, and we'll get into or we'll discuss the learning targets as well. But it's an interesting topic, so we're getting into those. I'm going to start with a joke today because, I'm trying to keep the humor through all of this. And so today's joke, instead of music, we have a joke today. Did you know that diarrhea is genetic? And the punchline is it runs in your genes. Get it? It runs in your genes. Okay, just kind of a gross one for us, the lightness. All right, so if we take a look, you're going to be working with the fill in the blank worksheet that goes with this. And I'll review this, and then we will also look at some examples. So genetics and Mendel, the learning targets are describe Mendel's work and the traits he identified. And then we're going to start, we're not going to do this today, but we're leading towards this. We're going to use Punnett squares to solve monohybrid and dihybrid genetic crosses. So this is going to introduce you to that. We're not going to do that. We'll do that next week. And then you are going to relate probability and Punnett squares to each other. So if we take a look at these cute little pictures, the question is, how can two gray rabbits, here's dad, here's mom, how can two gray rabbits produce a little black rabbit? How could that happen? And this is something Mendel kind of questioned or wondered about, not specifically rabbits. This is another question, and this would be your fill in the blank. How can two brown-eyed parents produce a blue-eyed child? And it is possible. Not maybe likely, but it is possible. So those are our questions. How does that happen? So this was something that a guy named Gregor Mendel, which is another fill in the blank for you, who happened to be born in 1822. He was a priest who studied science. And he also taught at a high school. And he also took care of a monastery garden. Why is the garden important? Because he started studying plants and he had all this access to plants. And so he started doing experiments. So that's why the garden is important to mention about Mendel. And what he studied the most was peas. He had a bunch of pea plants. They're easy to study and they have the specific, easily seen, viewable traits. So these peas have flowers, and that's how they reproduce, the bee and the pollen and all of that. But he kind of manipulated some of this. So on a flower, there is a part that produces pollen. And this pollen is basically a flower sperm. And then there's another part on the flower that has an egg. And when these two cells join, your little pollen and your little egg, poof, you make a little embryo, which happens to be in a seed. And so you have fertilization. So we're just kind of reviewing some of the plant basics. So, and he could have, let me keep going. Mendel had a garden with these pea plants, and he wanted to make more pea plants, but he wanted just one parent. So this is totally okay with plants. You want just one parent. That was self-pollinating. It had both the sperm, the little pollen, and the egg. And so the plants turned out identical to the parents. So we call that true breeding. When you have just one parent, happens with plants. They have both the pollen and the egg. It would be the wind or a bee, or in Mendel's case, he actually took like a paintbrush, dabbed some pollen on there, dabbed it on the egg. He was experimenting, and he experimented with just true breeding, or where you have one parent. And those plants turned out identically the same. They looked exactly like the parent plant. One parent plant, the child, the little baby plant, looks exactly like the parent. True breeding. So then he had a couple types of these self-pollinating plants. Type A plant was tall, had yellow seeds. The seeds were round. The pod shape was smooth. The flower was an axial position, or it was in a different location on the plant. They also had different flower colors. Type B were short. They had green seeds instead of yellow. They were all wrinkled seeds, little kind of wrinkled dudes. They had a pod shape that was constricted or like bent in. The flower was on the terminal or the end position. And again, it could have different colors. They had white and purple colors. Like, I don't remember which type had which, but just know that there were some different colors too. So these were easy to see traits. So he's like, I'd really like to mix these two type of plants. So how could he do it? Well, he did what we call crossbreeding. So he put pollen from the first type of plant onto the egg of the second type of plant. So that's where he got the paintbrush out, and he actually dabbed the pollen from type A to type B. And now the new plant came out from two parents, from parent A and parent B. And so the offspring that we get between parents with different traits is called a hybrid. So he watched the first genetic offspring from this first generation. And he was super excited. He was like, they're going to be a mix of parent A and parent B. I'm going to have some tall, some short. I'm going to have some with yellow, some with green. I'm going to have some that are all wrinkled and some that are all smooth. He was pretty excited. And so then he looks, were they a mix of parent A and B? Were all the little baby plants this mixture, a different? And it was no. In fact, all the baby plants were tall and they were yellow. So he was befuddled. This was strange. Why would this happen? He was confused. So we're going to look at some examples as to why that happened. Why didn't he get a mix? Now he did mix those babies. So he took those little baby plants and he did another crossbreeding. He dabbed some of their pollen onto some of their eggs. And so now we have a new generation, another generation. Now then he actually did get some variety. So why did it take it to the next generation to get the variety? So we're going to look at some examples. I'm going to pause for a second and then we'll take a look at some examples. So let's take a look at those examples.